taper end up here, or somewhere within here where you have a start to finish full bevel taper. And we didn't quite make it through, mostly because of this notch here that we had. So you can see we have this curve. That's not really what we want. No big deal. We'll just make a secondary cut. But this is still going to be a through, and we're going to start below it. And we're just going to finish off. So that first cut didn't work out, and there's going to be a lot of those first cuts not working out. But we have basically single cut, and you can see there's a little bit of a curvature here, which I generally finish off so there's not that gap that becomes evident here in a second. The second point, so we have a nice smooth cut, and then the second is this cleft, and this is just to hold these two pieces together. But I generally use this center point here on the wood where you have your pith, or it's not really pithy, but you have your heart of the wood, and I use it as my benchmark. We're just making a little cleft here, which is just a locking mechanism for these two pieces that are going together. And once you have your knife in there, you can actually pry it up a little bit to make that a little easier to slide together later. So that's step one. And then we're going to pick our signwood piece to use. And ideally, if you have a good match, meaning the caliper is very similar, it's going to make the whole process smoother. We're going to take this piece here, which has, not a perfect match, but it has some decent caliper compared to some of the other pieces we have, which would work just as well, but it's just a little trickier. So you want to make sure your buds are facing upwards from your cut, and so you aren't grafting with the wrong direction on your buds. And then the same thing holds. I want to pick where I slice this, so I don't have any angles based on the bend that don't match up with my understock. You'll get this with some practice. I'm going to start back here, and I'm going to try to make just one cut. And I've done this long enough that my cut's pretty well the same each time, with its length and so forth. So most of the time. That one's a little shorter. I really want it longer, so I'm just going to go back. Wood's cheap. So you can see here we have this cut, and I took off some excess there, but that's really just going to wilt and dehydrate later, and it's not going to come into play. So we have a pretty good match here. Now, you can always hold them together to see what kind of length match you have. The rootstock cut is a little longer, but this isn't going to not be an issue at all. But I do like to match the base with the base on the rootstock, so I'm going to adjust, instead of going where the heartwood is here on this sign piece, I'm going to actually back it off a little bit to account for that difference. So I'm going to, instead of going here, which is where I did on the understock in relationship to the heartwood, I'm going to back it off a little bit. So you make that same cleft, and then the point is you slide these right together. Now, before I slide them together in a locking point, I should point out what it is that you're matching up. And bud 9's nice because it's a red pigmented variety, so the cambium is lit up with some nice red. So it's this layer there. That's the cambium layer, that darkened, thin sliver. That's the vascular system. That's that's the layer responsible for cell division. That's what's going to mend and join these two pieces together. It's this thin red layer there. And on the pristine, it's a little harder to see. You kind of see it down here at the base, but it's that dark layer where you have that vivid yellow, and then it goes to kind of a darker green, and then a lighter, that dark green layer. And you can see it's just razor thin on that pristine. But those are the layers that need to match up. And apple is so easy that you don't need much of it to match up to have success. So ideally you want it to match all the way around, but it's not so necessary. As long as a portion of it matches, you're going to have success. So one of the things here is that our cambium, our caliper rather, on the sign material is a little bit less than the understock. So I'm sliding it over. This is what you do with a really thin caliper material as well, is you'd slide it over and match one side at least. Okay, so you can see the cambium exposed right here, but we're matching it on the other side of this in this particular example. So they're overlapping, and you can see that this is holding in place without any additional strapping, and that's the purpose of the cleft graft here. So you can have better success matching both way, all the way around, or to this degree, and this will work fine. So you just want to be careful with this when you lay it down. And then the next step is taping. So I tear off a piece, it'll work for me. And this step is very important because it's sealing these two pieces together in a way that for the 2 weeks that it takes for this to mend, typically 2 weeks, it can be less, you don't want this to dehydrate. You don't want those surface areas that you've just sliced open to dehydrate. So this is just a mechanism of helping hold it together. The tape does that, and it also keeps moisture in and keeps these wounds from dehydrating. So I start below my cut, like so, and then I'm pulling tension on this as I wrap, so it's binding those two pieces together nice and tight, and then I'm just spiraling it up all the way to the top above where the top portion is, and then I'm making sure while I'm doing this, if you're looking at that technique, I'm pulling with my thumb and the middle finger, and I'm kind of pressing with my index finger, and you can see that this is, I'm pushing those folds over and just trying to keep any air pockets out and keeping this nice and tight. You can see that it's nice and tight, and if you do a veneer, with, a graft with a piece that is a lot less in caliper, there'll be a side that has that gap. In this case, it's very minimal and non-issue, but you want to make sure if you have that gap that you squeeze all the air out. And that's your finish as far as the taping. And then, depending on how you feel and how much sign wood you have, you can top it. You just need one bud, folks. So if you feel like, well, I want to have a couple of buds, you can, but it doesn't really do you any good. So, in other words, there's not a significant advantage. So I'm topping above that bud. So this bud of pristine is what we're wanting to push. So that's the finished look here. You have your roots, your tag, a little bit of shank, and your union, and the varietal bud at the top. So that's the finished product. And this will get planted. You can put it in pots. You can put it right in the ground where you want your tree. You can plant it right now. If you had done this earlier, you would keep this a little while, keep the roots moist. You can have it at room temperature if you want and let it mend for a couple of weeks, but you can also put it in the refrigerator. As long as temperature is above freezing, it'll be fine in there until you're ready to plant. Best case is to do this right when you can get it outside and plant it. It'll mend fine out there. So, but warmer temperatures are better, just as a point. So if you can keep this where it's going to be warm for a while, like this time of year right now, we're in late March in Louisville, it's plenty warm outside and it'll mend out there. Temperatures are up. And you want that bud to break, and then there are going to be buds breaking all along this shank, and you want to strip those off, force all of the energy into that upper bud, and once it gets about 6 inches in growth, you're not going to have a lot of buds and breaks down below anymore, and all the energy is going to go into that tree development. So that's the process.